doctors often miss the full picture when it comes to hormones. You can feel exhausted, puffy, anxious, not yourself, and yet you're told, you look fine, your labs are normal. See you next year. Let's look at why conventional medicine misses the mark on this sort of stuff. Number one is standard labs are a single frame snapshot. Often people will come to me with lab results and they'll be like, okay, let's talk about everything going on in my body based on this. It's like, well, actually, that's not quite how it works. Most routine hormone testing or testing of any kind is like, I would liken it to taking one blurry photo in a 2-hour movie and deciding we understand the plot. So this implies two things. One, there's obviously a lot more detail and a shifting landscape day to day, hour to hour, week to week to take into consideration that we don't necessarily capture in some of your lab values, some of the very important ones. And number two, it's incredibly hard to make inferences from most routine testing, which is incredibly basic, especially in a public system like we have in Canada or in the UK, for example. So there's not a lot of markers a standard provider, a GP, can test without providing intense justification. So they're going to miss out on a lot of important markers that I would want to see to understand the picture of your hormone and metabolic health. So that's not your doctor's fault. It's the system we have. It's just, we can barely make out the actors in the movie, let alone piece together the plot based on like a complete blood count, which is not complete. It's just like red blood cells, white blood cells. Let's test your ferritin. Let's test 2 or 3 other markers for your liver and kidneys. And that's probably most of it. Not enough. Okay, so the second reason that we often miss what's going on is that reference ranges are pathology-centric, so disease-oriented, not performance-centric, so not towards optimal. I harp on about this all the time. All the time. What I mean by that is that lab ranges are designed to pick up disease, not to measure how vibrant and energized you feel. In other words, you have to be quite unwell to actually fall outside of conventional reference ranges because they are so wide. I want you in a much narrower range for optimal function and optimal health. It makes a big difference because what's going on here is that these conventional ranges are population averages. They're based on a sick population. So that tells you something about this conventional range, which is considered normal and healthy. It's not really. So this can be in here barely above like, oh my God, I'm about to fall over and still be told you're fine in some cases. That's a little hyperbolic, but you get what I'm saying. And for thyroid, for instance, the typical TSH range might go up to around 4 or 4.5, but most people perform and feel metabolically way better when they're down closer to the lower end of that range, between 1 and 2. So this is a major issue overall that I run into continuously in my work with clients. Docs will tell them their hormone levels are, quote, normal based on their labs, but they feel like garbage and they know something is off. Okay, that third reason conventional care can miss the mark when it comes to hormones is the whole synthetic versus bioidentical confusion. And this is a big one. Not all hormones act the same ways in the body. In fact, many birth control methods use synthetic hormones that are certainly not the same as what your body produces, aka they are not bioidentical or body identical. But many doctors are trained to call them by the same names as the bioidentical or body identical hormones, which is wild to me. So for instance, I will have women tell me regularly that they're on progesterone, but they're not. They're on synthetic progestins or progestogens that they're often called progesterone, but they're not. They were developed by drug companies to act similarly on the uterus as progesterone in order to fulfill a function. And they're great at that, say to stop pregnancy or stop heavy bleeding. One example, the IUD, the Mirena. However, they actually bind to progesterone receptors differently and can have opposite effects as desired on things like mood, your blood lipids, cholesterol, for example, breast tissue compared to bioidentical progesterone. And in fact, certain progestin-only IUDs, like the Mirena or injections, suppress ovulation and they lower your natural progesterone. And they create a false sense of, quote, hormone balance while actually driving some of the mood changes, sometimes weight gain, low libido, that sort of stuff. And that gets blamed on you instead of the prescription, which sucks. So, something to be aware of when you take exogenous hormones. Are they body identical, bioidentical, or are they synthetic? Similarly, birth controls containing synthetic estrogen, which is most of them, and if you grew up in the 80s or 90s like I did, a lot of us were on those things for years, and they can cause low testosterone levels, very common. We're already losing our testosterone from a young age, as I discussed before, so it's no wonder at like 39 years old, my libido was in the tank. Not fun. Anyway, this is not necessarily something we want to be giving to young girls upon reflection. So yeah, if you have a young lady in your life, it's worth talking about. Reason number 4, labs don't tell the full story. Missing context and the key roles of lifestyle and individual factors like sleep, stress, gut health, micronutrients, genetics, etc. So your hormones never act alone. Of course, they operate in a complex ecosystem where there's crosstalk with your nervous system, your guts, your nutrient status, and more. So we have to really look at the whole picture to understand the what, the why, and how to fix it all. For example, some forms of birth control can deplete nutrients like B6, B12, zinc, magnesium, nutrients your body actually needs to metabolize estrogen safely. Another example is SSRIs, which commonly deplete all important sodium. See this a lot. That's a big thing. And others like metformin, which is a blood sugar control drug, one of the most common drugs out there before GLP-1s came on the scene, still very common. Metformin depletes B12 and folic acid, which is B9. Very important vitamins for our health and sanity. So some of these things we can test, these markers, others we can't. And here I actually want to take a moment to share a story. Story time! And a poignant example of this approach in action. So I had a fairly typical client recently graduate from the Better Beyond 40 formula program. Let's call her Hannah. Hannah from Montana. She's actually from Montana. She's very cool. 49, a high-powered executive at a financial firm with multiple offices across the US. She has an insanely busy schedule, a ton of stress, a husband, 2 kids, and was dreaming about getting back to running regularly so she could do some of the fun races she used to do. Nothing crazy, just for fun. But that was like a long lost goal for her. She was in the tank and she was desperate to figure out what had become severe fatigue, brain fog, mood swings, an extra 40 pounds that she'd been struggling to get rid of for several years. She'd get rid of 10 and then they come back on, then put on another 5 and get rid of a few. It was like an awful situation. And these were all issues that collectively threatened to derail everything she valued in her life. She was really in a state when she came to me, and I'm so glad she did. And the thing is, according to her GP, her labs were normal, in air quotes. And so she felt totally brushed off for years. She knew something was wrong, kept going back to them for help, but no dice. So when we started working together, I looked at her blood work through a different lens, through like a functional lens, which focuses on optimal labs and symptoms, as opposed to simply looking at where one falls on conventional ranges and ignoring the symptoms. So especially in midlife and beyond, it becomes much more valuable that we fall into narrower, more optimal ranges when we're talking about hormones, blood sugar, insulin, vitamin D, and other key factors that play massive roles in our longevity and disease prevention and on how our bodies actually function day to day. Taking this tack with Hannah completely changed her results and her life. We actually uncovered that she was functionally hypothyroid, meaning that she had low thyroid function that wouldn't be flagged on conventional tests, as it was not with her doctor. And her doc wasn't able to help her for a number of reasons. And this is a very common situation. The first reason was that they only tested TSH, which is pretty common, not T3 or T4. And I explained why that's a problem before, because TSH isn't even a thyroid hormone. So testing it on its own is effectively useless. So there was that. There was also reverse T3 to test. It can be the thing that opposes the action of T3, as kind of implied by the name. And then I wanted to test for thyroid antibodies as well as part of a full thyroid panel. TSH, T3, T4, reverse T3, and thyroid antibodies. Second reason, what is considered normal for all three of those markers is far from optimal. The third problem was that she'd actually been on Synthroid for over a decade to counter the hypothyroid problem. Synthroid is actually a synthetic T4 thyroid hormone. Her doctor was like, this is fine, you're fine, this is how we're dealing with this. But that's a problem because while it is the most common treatment, it's certainly not a great one. And actually, I'll explain why. There is a fascinating story about the reason it's been so heavily marketed to doctors by Big Pharma, which I won't elaborate on here. But suffice to say, it is such a racket that the ex-president of the US Thyroid Association wrote a whole book called Rethinking Hypothyroid, in which he spent the first half of the book exposing the deception around getting doctors to believe that Synthroid is the best treatment for hypothyroid. Woo! There was a whole 60 minutes episode about this too. Anyway, I digress. Synthroid often doesn't help people because it is actually just T4, and many people do not convert T4 to T3 very well, either genetically or due to inflammation or simply from aging or other conversion issues. So we changed that up. We also looked at key factors that support thyroid and all of the hormones and energy systems of the body, which her doctor never actually tested in all of those years. Vitamin D, B12, insulin and blood sugar, inflammation, and so on. Immune health markers. These factors are so essential for metabolic and hormonal health. And so when we addressed these factors, everything changed for Hannah. She no longer struggles to resist napping in the afternoon or collapsing on the couch at 7 p.m. She's crushing it. At work, she has all-day energy. She's back to running. She has no more pain when she's trying to move her body, which was a big factor. Lots of inflammation. And she even competed in a race this fall. Her moods are steady. She's more optimistic and motivated than she's been in years rather than feeling blah and depressed. And she's finally losing the weight. She's over the moon after just 3 months working together, and this is just the beginning of her journey. She actually wrote me partway through our work together one day to say, I promise not to message you every day, but I'm celebrating. She'd just written me the day before about how happy she was. She said, recently, even a walk was exhausting and made me sore. Walked last night, felt better on return for the first time in ages. Did a run at lunch today and felt way better than I have in years. I actually have energy. I'm out of shape, but I have gas in the tank. And she's come a long way since then. So yay, Hannah. That's an example of what I mean by just taking a different tack on the conventional approach to labs and symptoms.